Today, we're going to embark on a dark adventure with 7 horror stories involving invasions of abandoned places. Get ready to hear chilling stories from people who decided to explore buildings, factories, hospitals, and houses forgotten by time, and ended up living scary and dangerous experiences. Let's find out what could be hidden behind rusty doors, dark corridors, and broken windows. So sit back, turn off the lights if you dare, and let this spine-tingling journey begin. Oh, and before you go exploring, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. Activate the bell and leave your like. This really helps the channel, and make sure you don't miss any scary content like this. Let's go? 1. The forgotten hospital. Thick fog covered the grounds of Kings Park Psychiatric Center when 5 New York University medical students arrived on the scene. The imposing Building 93, with its broken windows and peeling walls, stood like a grim monument to American psychiatry's past. Closed since 1996, the hospital complex had become an urban legend and a magnet for nocturnal explorers. "Perfect for our documentary about historical psychiatric treatments," commented Eliza, adjusting her professional camera. Along with Marcus, Aidan, Sophie, and Jared, she planned to spend the night filming the empty hallways and abandoned treatment rooms. The group ignored no entry signs and warnings about structural dangers. Using a back entrance with already broken padlocks, they infiltrated the main building at dusk. The smell of mold and old disinfectant still hung in the air. "Let's split up to cover more ground," Marcus suggested, handing out walkie-talkies. "We'll meet you on the 3rd floor in 2 hours." Sophie and Aidan headed to the old children's wing, while the others explored separately. Sophie, filming with her camera, narrated, "This hospital housed hundreds of patients, many admitted involuntarily. Rumors about unauthorized experiments persist to this day." On the 2nd floor, Eliza found something disturbing. A room with clear signs of recent occupation. A chair strategically positioned facing the window, food packaging, an old mattress. "Guys," he called over the radio, "someone is living here." Simultaneously, Marcus discovered a file room with medical records scattered across the floor. Some dated back to the 1990s, but others appeared to have been handled recently. One in particular caught his eye, that of an employee named Walter Simmons, with notes about obsessive behavior and refusal to leave work after closing. In the basement, Jared found a locked door. When he forced it open, it revealed a small room with walls covered in photographs. They were images of previous visitors to the hospital, taken without their knowledge. With horror, he recognized recent photos of his own group, arriving at the scene hours earlier. "We need to get out of here now," he shouted into the radio, but only heard static in response. On the 3rd floor, Sophie and Aidan found old treatment rooms with rusting equipment. "These were used for electroshock therapy," Aidan explained, touching a dust-covered machine. That's when they noticed fresh footprints on the dusty floor, not left by them. Their flashlights began to fail. In the growing darkness, they heard shuffling footsteps in the corridor. Sophie tried to use the radio, but it was dead. His cell phone had no signal. "Someone's jamming the signals," Aidan whispered. "We need to find the others." Meanwhile, Eliza followed a trail of personal objects. A glove, a notebook, a wristwatch that seemed purposely left to guide her. They took her to an old observation, a room with a one-way mirror. On the other side, he saw Marcus tied to a chair, unconscious. The group realized too late that they had fallen into a trap. Walter Simmons, a former nurse at the hospital, never really left when the institution closed. Living in the shadows of the abandoned building for nearly 3 decades, he had developed an obsession with protecting the site from invaders, studying them before acting. One by one, the students were separated. Jared found a way out, but when he tried to get help, he discovered that his car's tires had been slashed, the cell phone signal blocked by a homemade device. The police, busy with Halloween patrols in other areas, would not notice his absence until the next morning. At dawn, only Sophie remained free, hidden in a ventilation duct. Through the bars, he watched Walter methodically organizing old restraint, equipment, muttering about necessary procedures and problem patients. On the walls, hundreds of identifications and belongings from previous visitors served as macabre trophies. The case of the 5 missing students at Kings Park Psychiatric Center has become a grim warning about the dangers of exploring abandoned sites. Authorities found evidence that Walter Simmons had treated dozens of attackers over the years, using methods learned during his time as an employee. Building 93 was finally demolished in 2025, but the story of the medical students and the obsessive guardian who never abandoned his post continues to haunt Long Island, not as a supernatural tale, but as a reminder of the very real horrors that can await those who disrupt places that should remain forgotten. The Fabric Factory. The Turin sky was grey and dense when Luca and Giulia parked the car in front of the imposing facade of the former Bellini textile factory. The building, abandoned since the 1990s, was a giant with red bricks and broken windows, surrounded by tall grass and graffiti. For urban photographers like them, it was a paradise of textures, light, and decay. And, of course, an invitation to danger. Luca, fascinated by industrial architecture, had already explored dozens of places like this. Giulia, more cautious, was hesitant, but the promise of unique images convinced her. They jumped over the rusty gate and entered through a side door, the padlocks of which had been broken long ago. Inside, the smell of mold and old oil was suffocating, and the sound of their footsteps echoed through the empty hallways. The first floor was filled with rusting machines, spools of thread, and piles of rotting fabrics. The silence was absolute, broken only by the clicking of cameras and the occasional sound of a drop falling from a leaky pipe. Giulia photographed details: a headless doll, a 1987 calendar, a worker's helmet covered in dust. Luca, more daring, climbed a metal staircase to view the vast hall from above. On the second floor, they found something strange: fresh footprints in the dust, going back and forth to a door locked with a shiny new padlock. Giulia pointed out, "Did you see this? Someone was here a little while ago." Luca tried to laugh but felt a chill. They decided to follow the footprints, which led to a back room. There the smell of rust was stronger, and there were dark stains on the floor. As she got closer, Giulia noticed that there were marks of blood, some of which were still fresh. Next to the stains, a children's bracelet, a modern pack of cigarettes, and a recent bottle of mineral water. The climate has changed. Fascination gave way to fear. Luca suggested leaving, but Giulia, overcome by adrenaline, wanted to understand what was happening. They decided to photograph the evidence, but when they tried to use their cell phone to call the police, they realized there was no signal. The building, with thick walls and an iron structure, blocked any communication. Exploring further, they heard a muffled noise coming from the basement. The two looked at each other, undecided. Luca, armed only with the camera, led the way to a dark staircase. The smell of blood and urine was intense. At the bottom, they found a metal door ajar. Inside, a small room, lit only by a fallen lantern. On the floor, a dirty mattress, ropes, torn clothes, and a school backpack. On one of the walls, names scratched with nails and recent dates. Suddenly, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway above. Someone was there. Luca turned off the flashlight and pulled Giulia behind a stack of boxes. They heard the basement door creak and a gruff male voice muttering in Italian about unwanted visitors. The man descended slowly, dragging something metallic. Their hearts were beating so hard that they seemed to echo in the silence. The man searched the room, kicking the mattress, muttering about leaving no trace. He stopped next to his backpack, took out a cell phone, and, furious, realized that someone had gone through his things. Luca and Julia remained motionless, barely breathing. The man went up again, locking the cellar door and blocking the exit with a heavy object. Trapped, the photographers searched the room for any exit. They found, behind a loose panel, a narrow hole that led to an old pipe. Julia, thin, managed to get through first, guiding Luca through meters of darkness and dirt until they emerged into an abandoned engine room, already on the ground floor. The relief was brief. The man, noticing the escape, began screaming and running around the building, slamming doors and throwing objects. Luca and Julia ran through the corridors, guided by the faint light coming in through the broken windows. As they reached the side door, they heard the man behind them, panting, swearing, and threatening to hunt them down again if they told anyone. They ran to the car and drove off without looking back. On the way, they called the police, who arrived at the factory hours later. There, they found the basement empty, but with clear signs of captivity. Children's clothes, food remains, blood, stains and rope marks on the walls. The investigation revealed that the factory had been used for years by a local criminal, already wanted for kidnappings and human trafficking. Victims who went missing in the region had, in common, the last cell phone signal emitted near the factory. The case gained prominence in the Turin press, and the factory was finally sealed and monitored. For Luca and Julia, the experience left deep marks. They abandoned urban explorations and spent months in therapy. The fear of having been watched, hunted, and almost captured by someone real, not a ghost but a flesh-and-blood predator, forever changed the way they viewed abandoned places. The Bellini factory was demolished months later, but for those who lived that night, the terror remains. Sometimes the danger is not in the shadows, but in the fresh footprints and the watchful eyes of those who make abandonment their own hunting ground. The orphanage on the hill, the legend of St. Agnes Orphanage on an isolated hilltop on the outskirts of Birmingham, has always circulated among teenagers in the area. Closed since the 1980s, the blackened brick Victorian building was the subject of stories about mistreatment, disappearances, and screams heard at night. For many, it was just superstition. For others, it was the perfect setting for a test of courage. On a cold October night, 5 friends, Tom, Ellie, Marcus, Priya, and Ben, decided to test their limits. Armed with flashlights, cell phones, and a camera, they jumped over the rusty gate and climbed the trail covered in dry leaves. The orphanage, with its broken windows and creaking doors, seemed to watch them as they approached. "Let's go to the basement and come back. Whoever leaves first buys pizza for everyone," challenged Tom, always the boldest. Laughing nervously, the group entered through the back door, which gave way with a push. The smell of mold, rotting wood, and rat urine was strong. The floor creaked with each step. In the lobby, Ellie filmed everything, narrating for the video that would be posted on the group's channel. They climbed the main staircase, exploring empty dormitories, classrooms covered in graffiti, and a cafeteria with overturned chairs. They found old toys, torn books, and children's drawings on the walls. The tension increased with each dark corridor. On the second floor, Ben, quieter, began to move away from the group, attracted by a low sound coming from the end of the corridor. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, but the others were busy laughing at Marcus's joke. Ben went alone, flashlight shaking in his hand, to a half-open door. Inside, he found an iron staircase going underground. Curious, he slowly went down, calling for his friends. The smell of damp earth increased. When he reached the end, he realized he was in a maintenance tunnel, narrow and dark, with brick walls and rusty pipes. The sound of dripping water echoed through the hallway. Ben shone his flashlight forward and saw fresh footprints in the dust, too small to be those of adults. Suddenly, the light went out. Ben, in a panic, tried to turn on his cell phone, but there was no signal. The silence was broken by a whisper, coming from the dark, followed by quick footsteps. Ben ran back to the stairs, but the door was closed. He shouted for his friends, but only heard his own echo. Upstairs, the group noticed Ben's absence. They searched the entire building, shouting his name, but no response. A worried Ellie reviewed the camera footage and noticed a shadow moving behind Ben just before it disappeared. Marcus found the basement door locked from the inside, as if someone had closed it on purpose. Priya, shaking, suggested calling the police, but Tom insisted on trying to break down the door. They managed to force the lock and went down together, flashlights shaking in their hands. The tunnels were a maze of narrow corridors, full of rubbish, old mattresses, and recent food remains. On one of the walls, they saw scratches made with a knife, dates, names, and height marks, as if someone was monitoring a child's growth. At the end of the tunnel, they found a small, makeshift room. Blankets, cans of food, modern toys, and a school backpack. There were also newspaper clippings about disappearances in the area, including a recent photo of Ben printed on plain paper. Panic took over. As they explored, they heard rapid footsteps and heavy breathing. A short, dirty figure with disheveled hair ran past them, disappearing into another corridor. Tom tried to follow, but lost sight of the person. The group realized that they were not alone there. Someone lived in the tunnels, watching their every movement. Desperate, they returned to the ground floor, but the back door was locked from the outside. Ellie called the police, who arrived half an hour later. The agents searched the building, but did not find Ben or the tunnel dweller. Only signs of recent presence, children's clothes, remains of hot food, and small footprints. Ben's disappearance made headlines. The police discovered that other children had disappeared in the region in recent years, and that the orphanage was used by a homeless man, a former inmate, who kidnapped young people to protect them from the outside world. Ben was never found, and St. Agnes Orphanage was finally demolished months later. For the survivors, the night in the orphanage left deep scars. The fear of being watched, hunted, and never knowing their friend's fate haunted them for years. The legend of the Hill Orphanage gained new momentum, but now everyone knew. The true terror was not a ghost, but someone real, living in the shadows, waiting for the next visit. What's up, guys? The stories of raids on abandoned places are chilling. Even now, aren't they? If you're enjoying these scary stories, take the opportunity to take a quick break, subscribe to the channel, and leave your like. This really helps the channel grow and motivates me to continue bringing you more chilling content. Now, shall we go back to the next stories? There's still a lot of fear ahead. The Mirror Mansion. The Scottish rain fell mercilessly as Daniel and Faye Winters parked their car outside the rusty gates of Blackwood Manor. Located on the outskirts of Edinburgh, the Victorian property had been abandoned in the 1990s after the mysterious death of its last owner, an eccentric art collector called Malcolm Blackwood. "Are you sure about this?" asked Faye, observing the imposing structure through the fogged windshield. The mansion, with its Gothic towers and tall windows, seemed to watch them back. Daniel, an architectural photographer and enthusiast of abandoned places, smiled confidently. "Let's just take some photos. This place is legendary among urban explorers." What attracted the curious to Blackwood Manor was not just its grand proportions or its impeccable Victorian architecture, but rumors about Malcolm's collection of antique mirrors. Mirrors that, according to local legend, had been arranged to create optical illusions throughout the house. They jumped over the gate with ease. Other explorers had already broken the chain. The path to the main entrance was covered in dead leaves and fallen branches. A partially broken side window provided access to the interior. The entrance hall was impressive, even in its state of disrepair. A cobwebbed chandelier hung from the high ceiling, and a marble staircase curved upward to the second floor. On the walls, lighter rectangular marks indicated where paintings had been removed. "Look at this!" called Daniel, pointing to an oval mirror still hanging on the wall. It was the first of many, some broken, others intact, arranged at seemingly random angles throughout the hallways. Faye felt a shiver. It feels like we're being watched. It's just the effect of the mirrors, Daniel replied, although he also felt a growing uneasiness. They explored the first floor, photographing ornate rooms, a library with empty shelves, and a dining room with a long table covered in a dusty sheet. In each room, at least one mirror remained, strategically positioned. On the second floor, they found the bedrooms. The main one, presumably Malcolm's, was surprisingly well preserved. A four-poster bed, an antique wardrobe, and, on the opposite wall, a full-length mirror with a gold frame. "Strange," muttered Faye, approaching the mirror. "There's no dust, Daniel." Frowned. She was right. The mirror was clean, as if someone had kept it that way. Upon closer examination, he noticed something even more disturbing. A small red light blinking in the corner of the frame. "Faye," he called, his voice tense. "This is no ordinary mirror." He touched the surface and felt the cold glass, but when he pressed lightly, he realized that there was a space behind. It was one-way glass. The red light belonged to a camera. Panic began to grow when they realized they were not alone in the mansion. Someone was watching, perhaps recording every movement. They ran into the hallway, now aware that many of the mirrors were actually observation points. At the end of the corridor, they found a locked door. Daniel, driven by desperation, forced her with his shoulder until she gave way. Inside, they discovered a room transformed into a surveillance center. Monitors displayed images of the entire mansion, captured through false mirrors. On one of the monitors, they saw themselves, standing in the doorway, staring at the screen in horror. Even more disturbing were the recordings organized on shelves, hundreds of DVDs labeled with dates, from the past 5 years and names of visitors. Asian couple, March 2022. Group of teenagers, October 2023. Solo photographer, January 2024. "We need to get out of here," Faye whispered, shaking. Before they could move, they heard footsteps in the hallway. They hid behind a closet as the door opened. A middle-aged man wearing dark clothes and gloves walked in calmly. He sat in front of the monitors, observing other areas of the mansion, apparently looking for them. Daniel and Faye remained still, barely breathing. The man grabbed a remote control and began playing recent recordings. Previous visitors exploring the mansion, unaware that they were being filmed. In some recordings, the man appeared stealthily, following the invaders, sometimes getting disturbingly close without being noticed. When the man left to look for them elsewhere, the couple took the opportunity to escape. They descended the stairs in absolute silence, aware that their every movement could be monitored. As they passed through the lobby, Faye noticed something they had missed before. Small scuff marks on the wooden floor, leading to a door under the stairs. Driven by morbid curiosity, she quickly opened it. The smell of decay hit her like a blow. In the small space, they saw a pile of belongings: wallets, cell phones, car keys, trophies from visitors who, unlike them, never made it out. They ran to the window they had entered through, hearing hurried footsteps behind them. The man shouted, his voice echoing off the walls of the mansion, "You can't go! I'm not done collecting yet." They barely managed to escape, running through the garden, while the man chased them. In the car, with his hands shaking, Daniel was barely able to start it. Looking in the rearview mirror, they saw the man standing at the gate, watching them leave. They reported the case to the police, who found evidence of multiple disappearances in the mansion. The man, identified as Jeremy Blackwood, nephew of the late Malcolm, had turned his uncle's obsession with mirrors into something much more sinister: a surveillance network to study and occasionally collect visitors. The Mansion of Mirrors, as it became known in the newspapers, was finally demolished in 2025. For Daniel and Faye, however, the terror remains. The feeling of being watched through reflective surfaces, the fear that someone is on the other side of the mirror, watching, waiting, collecting moments of their lives without them knowing. And for the residents of Edinburgh, there was a warning. Not every urban legend is just a story, and not every mirror only shows its reflection. The closed Cinema Svetlo had been the pride of the Žižkov neighborhood for nearly 7 decades before it closed its doors in 2018. The Art Deco building, with its ornate facade and vintage sign, stood like a ghost of a bygone era, awaiting demolition to make way for a modern apartment complex. For older residents, it was a relic of memories. For young people like Lucas, Petra, and Mikhail, it was the perfect setting for a nighttime adventure. They say the projectionist refused to leave when they closed, commented Lucas, as he pried the lock on the side door with a screwdriver. It had to be removed by force. Petra rolled her eyes. There's always a story like that for abandoned places. The trio had met at university, united by their interest in urban photography and exploring forgotten places. They had already visited abandoned factories and decommissioned hospitals, but the cinema had a special appeal, the promise of a cinematic setting for their night photos. The lock gave way with a metallic click. They entered a narrow hallway that smelled of mold and stale popcorn. Their flashlights revealed faded movie posters and a dust-covered concession stand. Mikhail, the most cautious of the three, checked if the door still opened from the inside before they followed. "Let's go to the projection room," Lucas suggested, leading the way. The main hall was impressive even in the darkness. Hundreds of red armchairs lined up in front of a torn screen. The vaulted ceiling still displayed Art Deco paintings, now stained with damp. Petra took photos, the flash briefly illuminating the empty space. They found the stairs to the projection booth and climbed in silence. Upstairs, to everyone's surprise, the old 35mm projector was still in place, a mechanical relic from another era. Even more surprising, there was no dust on it. "Someone was here recently," Mikhail noted, running his finger across the clean metal surface. Lucas shrugged. "Probably other explorers like us." They settled into the screening room, unpacking. Sandwiches and beer. The plan was to spend the night there, photograph the sunrise through the lobby's stained glass windows, and leave before the construction workers arrived in the morning. They talked about classic films they would have liked to see in that theater, their voices echoing through the empty space. Around midnight, Petra went downstairs to use the lobby bathroom, carrying her flashlight. 10 minutes passed and she didn't return. Lucas called over the radio, but only received static in response. "I'll look for her," he said, worried. Mikhail was left alone in the cabin, uncomfortable with the sudden silence. That's when he heard it, the unmistakable sound of a film being loaded onto the projector. The ancient mechanism began to rotate on its own, although it was not connected to any power source. The projector light turned on, casting a white beam through the suspended dust. Paralyzed, Mikhail watched as flickering images appeared on the torn screen below. It was not a commercial film, but recordings of the cinema itself. People entering, sitting, watching. The images seemed recent, some showing the place already partially abandoned. In one sequence, he recognized with horror urban explorers like them, unknowingly filmed. The radio in his hand crackled. Lucas's voice sounded distant, tense. "Mikhail, the doors are locked. Someone locked us in here. I can't find Petra." Before he could respond, Mikhail heard footsteps on the cabin stairs. Heavy, deliberate. He hid behind the projector, his heart pounding. The door slowly opened. An elderly man entered, wearing what appeared to be an old projectionist's uniform. He carried a reel of film in one hand and something metallic in the other. He approached the projector, muttering to himself in Czech, apparently oblivious to Mikhail's presence. Through the radio, Mikhail heard a muffled scream from Lucas. followed by silence. The man turned towards the sound, a smile slowly appearing on his wrinkled face. He spoke directly to Mikhail, although he couldn't see him. "You are today's protagonists. The public is waiting." Mikhail then understood what was happening. The man, presumably the former projectionist, had not simply refused to leave the cinema. He had turned the place into his own macabre theater, attracting visitors to create his content. The images on the screen changed, now showing Petra tied to an armchair in the first row and Lucas being dragged down the hallway. The man adjusted. The projector, satisfied with his work, 50 years of projecting other people's stories, he muttered. Now I create my own. Police found Cinema Svetlo quiet the next morning after a construction worker noticed the side door forced open. Inside, there was no sign of the three students, just the still warm projector and a recent film reel containing disturbing scenes of other visitors. The case of the missing Cinema Svetlo has become one of Prague's most intriguing criminal mysteries. Authorities discovered a network of tunnels beneath the cinema, connecting it to an old bomb shelter where belongings of at least a dozen people missing over the past 5 years were found. The projectionist, identified as Joseph Novak, was never located. The cinema was finally demolished in 2024, but the story of the three friends who became part of a macabre exhibition continues to circulate as a warning to urban explorers. Some places remain open even after closing their doors to the public. The hotel by the lake, the Lakeside Palace. Hotel had been the symbol of tourist luxury in Queenstown for decades before it closed abruptly in 2017. Situated on the shores of Lake Wakatipu, the imposing 5-story building, with its Victorian architecture and once impeccable gardens, was now slowly deteriorating, its broken windows reflecting the lake's glow like empty eyes. For 5 urban explorers who met online, the abandoned hotel represented the perfect opportunity. Alex, professional photographer and unofficial leader of the group. Mia, an architecture student fascinated by historic buildings. Ravi, vlogger specializing in abandoned places. Sophia, investigative journalist. And Noah, the youngest and most inexperienced, who joined the group just a week before the expedition. "They say the hotel closed overnight," Mia commented as they walked along the side path, avoiding the main entrance guarded by deactivated cameras. Guests were evacuated without explanation. "Financial problems," Sophia replied. "Officially, at least. But there are rumors about guest disappearances that have never been clarified." Noah, carrying filming equipment, looked nervous. "Do you guys really do this often? Break into property?" Alex smiled. "It's not an invasion. It's preserving memory through documentation." They found a back entrance, a service door with the lock already broken by previous visitors. The interior smelled of mold, rotten wood, and something indefinable, sweet and unpleasant. The once luxurious main lobby was covered in dust and dry leaves blown by the wind. A large crystal chandelier hung dangerously from the ceiling, several of its pendants broken on the floor. They split up to explore. Alex and Sophia headed to the ballroom. Mia went to examine the architecture of the upper corridors, while Ravi and Noah were in charge of checking the rooms on the first floor. In the old ballroom, Alex was photographing the peeling frescoes when Sophia called him, her voice tense. "Alex, look at this." On the back wall, partially hidden by a loose panel, was a list of handwritten names, many of them crossed out in red paint. Recent dates accompanied each name, the most recent just 2 weeks ago. "That doesn't look like vandals," muttered Sophia, taking photos with her cell phone. On the second floor, Mia was taking notes on the architectural details when she noticed something strange. One of the rooms, unlike the others, seemed inhabited. The bed was made, There were clothes folded. On a chair and on the table the remains of a recent meal. On the wall, a map of the region with red markings, mainly isolated trails and access points to the lake. Meanwhile, Ravi and Noah explored the first floor rooms, filming for Ravi's channel. In one of them, they found an open suitcase with women's clothes and an Australian passport. The date of entry into the country showed 3 months ago. "That's very strange," said Ravi, leafing through the passport. "It appears the person simply disappeared mid-stay." Noah looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Maybe we should leave. This doesn't seem right." Ravi continued filming. "Relax. These are probably things left behind when the hotel closed." In 2017, with a 2023 passport, the group gathered in the lobby to share discoveries. The tension grew as they realized they were facing something more sinister than a simple abandoned hotel. Sophia showed the photos of the list of names. "Some of these names appear in missing persons records in the region," he explained, showing news reports on his cell phone. "Tourists mainly. The police never found any connections between the cases." Mia described the inhabited room. Alex mentioned seeing fresh footprints in the dust of the third-floor hallway. Ravi showed the video of the found passport. Only Noah remained silent, uneasy. "We need to get out and tell the police," Alex decided. "This goes beyond simple exploration." As they headed towards the exit, the lobby doors closed with a bang. The windows, already barred, offered no escape route. Someone had locked the exits. "It must be the wind," Noah suggested, his voice shaky. "Let's try another way out." The group climbed to the second floor, looking for a balcony or fire escape. Natural light was quickly diminishing, forcing them to use flashlights. That's when Sophia noticed the pattern of markings on the map corresponded to the places where the victims disappeared. "It's no coincidence," he whispered to Alex. "Someone is using this hotel as a base." Mia suddenly screamed. In the room he had found before, there was now one more item, his own backpack, which he had left in the lobby. Beside it, a sheet of paper with their names written, still without scratches. "He's here," Ravi murmured, looking around nervously. "And you know who we are." The group decided to stay together, moving towards the kitchen, where there was a service door. Along the way, Alex noticed that Noah seemed to know the layout of the hotel with unusual precision for someone who had never been there before. In the dark kitchen, Sophia confronted Noah. "How did you hear about the hotel? You only joined the group a week ago, specifically for this exploration." Noah smiled, a different smile from the nervous young man they had met. "You explorers are so predictable, always looking for the next abandoned place, always ignoring warnings, always going where you're not called." Realization hit the group like an icy wave. Noah was not a victim of nervousness, but the predator who used the hotel as a trap, attracting tourists and now urban explorers. The Lakeside Palace Hotel case became one of New Zealand's most notorious. 3 of the 5 explorers managed to escape and alert authorities. At the hotel, police found evidence linking Noah, actually Thomas Reeves, a former hotel employee, to at least 17 disappearances over the past 3 years. For survivors, the experience left permanent scars and a warning that they share on urban exploration forums. Sometimes the real danger lies not in the abandoned place, but in the person who suggests exploring it. The train station winter in Lille was damp and silent, and the old Saint-Pierre train station, closed since 1998, looked even more desolate in the early morning fog. For brothers Camille and Hugo, the promise of adventure was irresistible. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and the typical courage of those who grew up hearing stories about ghost trains, they jumped over the rusty gate and followed the tracks. Covered in leaves and rust, the station was a maze of empty platforms, broken benches, and timetable boards frozen in time. The silence was so thick that every step echoed off the concrete arches. Hugo, the eldest, led the way, pointing out fresh graffiti and sneaker marks in the dust. "Someone was here a little while ago," he murmured, intrigued. At the end of the main platform, they found an old passenger car, isolated from the others. Its windows were covered with metal plates, and the door was locked with a shiny new padlock. Camille, curious, tried to look through a crack, but only saw darkness. "Let's try to open it," suggested Hugo, picking up an abandoned iron bar. After a few minutes of effort, they managed to break the lock. The door slid open with a loud creak, revealing the dark interior filled with the smell of mold and something stronger, a metallic odor, almost like blood. Before they could enter, they heard a muffled sound coming from inside, rapid knocks and a hoarse whisper, almost begging for help. "Is anyone there?" Camille asked, but the only response was a low, desperate cry. Hugo turned on the flashlight and pointed it at the back of the carriage, where a thin, dirty and tied-up figure was trying to get up. Camille ran to help, but at the same moment, the carriage door closed violently. Outside, hurried footsteps echoed on the platform. Someone locked the door from the outside, trapping them with the victim. Panic set in. Hugo tried to force the door, but it wouldn't budge. The prisoner, a man of about 30, trembled and whispered in French, "He is here. He will come back. We cannot stay here." Outside, footsteps could be heard circling the carriage, followed by the sound of something metallic being dragged. The flashlights began to fail, and the tension increased. Camille tried to call the police, but there was no signal. The metal structure blocked any communication. Little by little, the prisoner revealed what he knew. He had been kidnapped 2 days earlier while exploring the station alone. The kidnapper, according to him, was a tall man with his face covered, who fed him just enough to keep him alive. "He likes to play with people, to hunt," he whispered, his eyes wide with fear. Hugo realized they were being watched. Small holes in the metal plates allowed someone outside to see everything that was happening inside. The sound of dragging chains and muffled laughter echoed in the night. Suddenly, the carriage began to move slowly, pulled by an improvised machine. The track creaked under their weight, leading them into a dark tunnel. The prisoner panicked, shouting for them to get out of there. Hugo and Camille tried to break into a window, but the metal plates resisted. In the tunnel, the carriage stopped abruptly. The darkness was total, except for the dim light of Hugo's flashlight. The sound of approaching footsteps could be heard, now inside the tunnel. The kidnapper, finally visible in the light, was a thin man with leather gloves and a makeshift mask. Covering his face, he carried an iron bar and watched the three of them with disturbing calm. "Welcome to my game," he murmured in French. "Do you like to explore? So explore fear." He began banging on the side of the carriage, causing panic. Hugo, desperate, found a toolbox forgotten under one of the benches. Using a wrench, he managed to free part of the window pane. Camille and the prisoner helped, and together they opened a gap sufficient to escape. They ran through the dark tunnel, hearing the kidnapper scream after them. They emerged onto the opposite platform, where they finally got a cell phone signal and called the police. The man who hunted them disappeared into the station's labyrinths. The police found the wagon with clear signs of captivity: ropes, canned food, dirty clothes, and marks of struggle. It turned out that other recent disappearances in the region were linked to the same location. The hijacker was never found, but reports of strange sounds and lights at the station continued for months. For Camille and Hugo, the night marked the end of urban explorations. The fear of being watched, hunted, and locked forever in a forgotten place became a recurring nightmare. And for the residents of Lille, Saint-Pierre station has become avoided. Not because of legends of ghosts, but because of the real terror. that lurks on the abandoned trails. And so we come to the end of our 7 horror stories involving invasions of abandoned places. So which one scared you the most? Will anything make you think twice before entering a forgotten place? Tell us in the comments which one was your favorite. If you enjoyed this dive into the world of abandoned and scary places, don't forget to leave a like. This really helps the channel grow and encourages me to bring you more chilling stories. And if you are not yet registered, take the opportunity now to sign up and activate the bell.